The mountains of Vermont held their silence like a secret. And in that silence lived a man who had forgotten how to let anyone in. His name was Jax Miller, a former Navy SEAL who had traded the chaos of war for the stillness of snow. He lived alone in a wooden cabin where the only sounds were the crackle of fire and the whisper of wind through pine. He had survived impossible missions, but he could not survive the memory of the one man he failed to bring home, so he hid. Until one frozen night, when a mother with 9 lives to protect appeared at his door, her eyes carrying the same warrior's resolve he once knew. She was dying on her feet, but she would not stop. 8 times she walked back into the blizzard. 8 times she returned with another fragile heartbeat in her jaws. And when the smallest one stopped breathing, Jax Miller had to decide whether he would stay a ghost in the mountains or become the man he was trained to be. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The cold came early that year. By mid-November, the mountains of northern Vermont were already draped in white, and the roads that carved through the wilderness had become trails of ice and memory. The town of Millfield sat tucked between 2 ridges, a place where everyone knew everyone, where the general store still had a bulletin board made of cork, and where the church bell rang every Sunday, whether anyone showed up or not. But Jax Miller did not go to church. He did not go anywhere. He lived 3 miles up a winding dirt road that most people forgot existed, in a cabin his grandfather had built 50 years ago with his own hands. The structure was small but solid log walls chinked with moss and clay, a tin roof that sang when the rain fell, and a stone chimney that rose like a gray fist into the sky. There was no television, no internet. Just a wood stove, a propane lamp, and a single bed pushed against the far wall. Jax had lived there for 2 years. He was 38 years old, though his eyes carried the weight of a much older man. His hair was dark and cropped short, military precision still woven into his habits. His shoulders were broad, his hands scarred and strong, and his movements were always deliberate, always controlled. He did not waste words. He did not waste motion. Everything about him was measured, contained, locked down. He had been a Navy SEAL for 12 years. He had seen the worst of what men could do to each other. He had pulled triggers in the dark, carried wounded brothers across deserts, and made decisions that saved lives and ended others. He had been decorated, respected, trusted. But none of that mattered after the day Grady Coleman died. Grady had been his swim buddy, his spotter, his closest friend. They had gone through Hell Week together, survived deployments in places whose names never made the news, and saved each other more times than either could count. Grady was the kind of man who could make you laugh in the middle of a firefight, who never left anyone behind, who believed in the mission even when the mission made no sense. He had a wife back home named Sarah and a daughter named Emma, who was 3 years old and called Jax Uncle Jax every time he visited. But on a mission in the mountains of Afghanistan, during an extraction gone wrong, Grady had taken a round through the chest while covering Jax's position. Jax had carried him 2 miles through enemy fire, refusing to leave him behind, his hands slick with blood, his voice hoarse from screaming for the medevac. But by the time the helicopter arrived, Grady's pulse was gone. His eyes were open, staring at the sky, and Jax had closed them with his own trembling fingers. Jax never forgave himself. So he left. He walked away from the teams, from the brotherhood, from the only life he had ever known. He came to Vermont because it was quiet, because no one asked questions, and because the mountains did not judge him for the things he could not undo. For 2 years, he chopped wood, hauled water, and watched the seasons turn. He spoke to almost no one. He ate alone, he slept alone, and every night, when the fire burned low and the shadows grew long, he saw Grady's face in the smoke. He saw Sarah's tears at the funeral. He saw little Emma asking why Uncle Jax looked so sad. And he saw his own reflection in the mirror, a man who had survived when his brother had not. The guilt was a living thing. It wrapped around his chest like barbed wire, tightening with every breath. It whispered to him in the dark, telling him he did not deserve peace, did not deserve rest, did not deserve to move on. So he stayed in the mountains, in the cabin, in the silence. Alone. The days blurred together. Winter came, then spring, then summer, then winter again. Jax kept to himself. He did not make friends. He did not join the community. When people waved at him in town, he nodded and kept walking. When his neighbor, Martha Jenkins, brought him food, he thanked her and closed the door. He was not rude. He was simply gone. But storms have a way of changing things. And on the night of November 16th, the worst blizzard in a decade rolled over the mountains like a fist closing around the world. If courage were measured not by the battles we choose, but by the hearts we open when we've been broken, then maybe this story deserves to be heard. Hit the like button if you believe some guests arrived not by accident, but by grace. The wind hit first. Jax was inside the cabin, feeding split logs into the stove, when he heard it. A low moan that grew into a roar, pressing against the walls, rattling the windows in their frames. He straightened, listening. The temperature had been dropping all day, but this was different. This was the kind of storm that buried roads, snapped power lines, and left people stranded for days. He moved to the window and looked out. The world was disappearing. Snow fell in thick, violent curtains, erasing the trees, the road, the sky. The wind howled like something alive, and the cold pressed against the glass like a living thing trying to get in. Jax watched for a moment, then turned away. He had enough wood, enough food. He would wait it out, like he always did. Alone. He poured himself a cup of black coffee from the percolator on the stove and sat down at the small wooden table near the fireplace. The light from the flames danced across the walls, casting shadows that moved like ghosts. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the silence was absolute. He thought about Grady. He thought about the last thing his friend had said before the bullet hit. "Got your six, brother." Jax closed his eyes and gripped the coffee cup until his knuckles turned white. Until he heard the sound. At first he thought it was the wind, a low, rhythmic scratching against the door. But then it came again, deliberate, insistent. Not the scrape of a branch, not the rattle of ice. Something was out there. Jax set down his cup and rose to his feet. His instincts, honed by years of combat, kicked in immediately. His hand moved to the knife on his belt, a habit he had never broken. He crossed the room in 3 silent strides and stood beside the door, listening. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Then a sound that made his chest tighten. A whimper. Jax unlatched the door and pulled it open. The wind hit him like a wall, driving snow into his face, stealing his breath. He squinted into the whiteout, scanning the porch. And then he saw her. A dog. A German shepherd, her coat matted with ice and snow, her body trembling from cold and exhaustion. She stood on the wooden planks of the porch, her head low, her dark eyes fixed on him. Her ribs were visible beneath her fur. Her paws were cracked and bleeding. But her stance was steady, resolute, the stance of a soldier who had come too far to turn back now. In her mouth, she held something small and wet and moving. A puppy. Jax froze. The dog did not bark, did not growl. She simply stood there, waiting, as if she had known he would open the door, as if she had been counting on it. For a moment, neither of them moved. The snow swirled between them, and the wind screamed, and the cold bit into Jax's skin. But he could not look away from her eyes. They were dark and deep, and filled with something he recognized. Desperation and trust. Then the dog stepped forward, walked past him into the cabin, and set the puppy gently on the floor near the stove. The tiny creature squeaked, its eyes still closed, its body no bigger than Jax's hand. The mother dog turned, looked at him once more, and then walked back out into the storm. Jax stood in the doorway, stunned. Wait. But she was already gone, swallowed by the snow. He stood there for 10 seconds, 20. The cold bit into his skin, but he did not move. He stared into the white chaos, his mind racing. And then, through the howling wind, he saw her again. She was coming back. Her head was down, her body leaning into the storm, and in her mouth was another puppy. Jax's breath caught. She climbed the steps, her legs shaking, and carried the second puppy inside. She placed it beside the first, nosed it gently to make sure it was breathing, and turned back toward the door. "Jesus," Jax whispered. She went out again. And again. And again. 8 times, Jax watched her disappear into the blizzard. 8 times she returned, each trip slower than the last, her body growing weaker, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The snow clung to her fur in thick clumps. Ice formed on her muzzle, her legs trembled with every step, but she did not stop. She brought every single one of her puppies into his cabin, laying them carefully near the heat of the stove, her eyes never leaving them for long. Jax counted them as she brought them in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the 9th. When the last puppy was finally inside, the mother dog collapsed. She lay on her side, her chest heaving, her legs trembling. Her fur was crusted with ice. Her paws were cracked and bleeding. Blood stained the snow she had tracked in. But her eyes were steady, watchful, fierce. She looked at him, and Jax understood. She had done the impossible. She had walked through the storm 9 times, carrying each of her babies to safety, because she had no other choice. Because mothers do not give up. Because soldiers do not leave anyone behind. Jax closed the door and locked it. The wind screamed outside, but inside the only sound was the soft mewling of 9 newborn puppies and the ragged breathing of their mother. He stood there, staring at the scene before him, and for the first time in 2 years, Jax Miller felt something crack open inside his chest. He knelt beside the mother dog. She watched him, her body tense, ready to defend her babies if he made the wrong move. But Jax moved slowly, carefully. He reached out and gently touched her head. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "I've got you." She did not relax. Not yet. But she did not pull away either. Jax looked at the puppies. They were tiny, fragile, covered in birth fluid and snow. They wriggled and squeaked, blind and helpless, searching for warmth. He had no idea how old they were. Hours, maybe, a day at most. And they were all still alive. Because of her. If you've ever been chosen by someone who refused to give up, even when the world was falling apart, drop a comment and let us know what that felt like. Jax did not sleep that night. He moved with the efficiency of a soldier, his training taking over. He grabbed every blanket and towel he owned and spread them on the floor near the stove, creating a soft, warm nest. The fire crackled and popped, throwing heat into the small room. He adjusted the damper to keep the temperature steady, then turned his attention to the puppies. He gently lifted each one and placed them in the center of the nest, their tiny bodies wriggling and squeaking. The mother dog watched him, her breathing still labored, but she did not resist. She seemed to understand that he was helping, that he was not a threat. When all the puppies were settled, Jax turned his attention to the mother. She was soaked, freezing, and clearly malnourished. He could see every rib beneath her fur. Her hip bones jutted out sharply. Her eyes were sunken. She had been starving, and she had still walked through the storm 9 times. Jax filled a bowl with warm water and set it in front of her. She drank slowly, her tongue lapping weakly. Then he found a can of beef stew in his pantry, heated it on the stove, and spooned it into another bowl. She ate like she had not seen food in days, maybe weeks. While she ate, Jax knelt beside the puppies and counted them again. 9. All of them, tiny, fragile, blind. Their fur was still damp from the cold, but they were alive. He used a dry towel to carefully rub each one, warming their small bodies, checking for injuries. 8 of them seemed healthy, considering what they had just been through. But one was different. The smallest of the litter, a little female with a black mask and oversized paws, was not moving the way the others were. She lay on her side, her breathing shallow, her body limp. Her mouth was slightly open, and her tongue was pale. Jax picked her up, holding her in his palm. She was cold, too cold. He had seen this before. Hypothermia, shock, the body shutting down. "Come on," he murmured. "Stay with me." He tucked her inside his flannel shirt, against his chest, letting his body heat warm her. He could feel her tiny heartbeat, faint and irregular. It fluttered against his skin like a moth trapped in a jar. Jax looked at the mother dog. She had finished eating and was now lying beside the other puppies, her body wrapped protectively around them, but her eyes were on him. On the smallest puppy, she whined softly. "I know," Jax said. "I'm going to help her." He had no idea if the dog understood him, but he said it anyway. Because in that moment, it felt like a promise. Jax grabbed his satellite phone from the shelf and dialed the only number he knew in town. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, sharp and alert despite the late hour. "This is Dr. Rivers." "Maya," Jax said, his voice rough from disuse. "It's Jax Miller. I need help." There was a pause. "Doctor?" Maya Rivers was the town's only veterinarian, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes, steady hands, and a reputation for driving through anything to reach an animal in need. She had met Jax once, 2 years ago, when he first arrived in town and brought in a fox kit he had found injured on the road. She had saved the fox, sent Jax on his way, and never seen him again. Until now. "Jax?" Her voice softened with surprise. "What's wrong?" "I've got a dog," he said. "A German Shepherd. She showed up in the storm with 9 puppies. One of them is in bad shape. I don't know if she's going to make it. Can you bring them in?" Jax looked out the window. The storm was still raging. The road was impassable. Even if he had a truck that could handle the snow, he would never make it down the mountain. "No, I'm snowed in." "Then I'm coming to you." "Maya, you can't. The roads are—" "I'll be there in 30 minutes." The line went dead. Jax set down the phone and looked at the puppy in his hand. Her breathing was still shallow, but she was warming up. He could feel the faint flutter of her heartbeat against his palm. "Hang on," he whispered. "Just hang on." He sat down on the floor, his back against the wall, and kept the puppy pressed against his chest. The mother dog watched him, her eyes unblinking. The other puppies squirmed and mewed, searching for warmth and milk. The fire crackled, the storm raged. And Jax waited. For the first time in 2 years, he was not alone. Maya Rivers arrived in 27 minutes. Jax heard the rumble of her truck before he saw the headlights cutting through the snow. He opened the door and watched as she climbed out, a heavy canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her face half hidden beneath a wool hat and scarf. She was small but sturdy, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that missed nothing. She wore thick boots, a waterproof coat, and gloves that had seen years of hard use. "Where are they?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Jax stepped aside, and she walked in, stamping snow off her boots. Her gaze swept the room and landed on the pile of blankets near the stove. She dropped her bag and knelt beside the puppies without a word. "Mother's over there," Jax said, nodding toward the German Shepherd, who was lying near the fire watching Maya with wary eyes. Maya glanced at the dog, then back at the puppies. She pulled out a stethoscope, a thermometer, and a small pen light from her bag. She worked quickly, checking each puppy, her hands gentle but sure. She spoke softly as she worked, a low murmur that seemed to calm the tiny creatures. "They're cold, but they're stable," she said after a few minutes. "Except this one." She was holding the smallest puppy, the one Jax had been keeping warm against his chest. "Her body temp is too low," Maya said, her voice steady but serious. "She's in shock. We need to get her warm and get fluids into her, or she's not going to make it through the night." Jax felt his jaw tighten. "What do you need?" "Heating pads, towels, and water. Boil some water and fill a few hot water bottles if you have them. We'll create a warming bed, and I need you to hold her while I get an IV started." "IV? She's that small." "I know, but it's the only way." Jax did not argue. He moved. For the next 2 hours, Jax and Maya worked side by side in silence, their movements synchronized like soldiers in the field. Jax boiled water on the stove, filled rubber bottles he found in a drawer, wrapped them in towels, and arranged them in a small box lined with soft fabric. Maya prepared her equipment: tiny needles, bags of saline, and medical tape. She worked with the precision of a surgeon, her face calm and focused. The puppy did not fight. She was too weak. "Hold her steady," Maya said. "I need her leg extended." Jax cradled the puppy in his hands, holding her tiny leg between his thumb and forefinger. The leg was no thicker than a pencil. Maya inserted the needle with a single practiced motion. The puppy whimpered once, a sound so small and fragile it made Jax's chest ache. "Got it," Maya said. She taped the IV line in place and hung the saline bag from a nail on the wall. "Now we wait." But slowly, so slowly, the puppy began to respond. Her breathing evened out, her body warmed, her tiny paws twitched. "She's responding," Maya said quietly. "Good. Keep her warm. Don't let her move too much." Jax cradled the puppy in his hands, his eyes fixed on her small chest, watching it rise and fall. He had not felt this kind of fear in a long time, not since Grady. Not since the moment he realized he could not save him. But this time, maybe he could. As the hours passed, the storm outside began to quiet. The wind's howl softened to a whisper. The snow fell more gently. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, and the mother dog finally closed her eyes and slept. Maya sat back on her heels and looked at Jax. "You did good," she said. Jax did not answer. He just kept holding the puppy, feeling the fragile warmth of life in his hands. "How long have you been up here?" Maya asked after a while. 2 years. "Alone?" "Yeah." Maya nodded. She did not press. She just pulled a thermos from her bag and poured 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Jax. "You know," she said, "most people would have turned her away. It's easier to close the door." "I thought about it," Jax admitted. "But you didn't." "No." Maya smiled. "That dog knew what she was doing. She didn't just need shelter, she needed you." Jax looked at her, confused. "Why me?" "Because you're the kind of man who doesn't quit, even when it's hard, even when it hurts." She took a sip of coffee. "That's a rare thing, Jax." He did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat in silence, drinking coffee, watching the puppies sleep. The smallest one was still in Jax's hands, her tiny body rising and falling with each breath. "She's going to make it," Maya said softly. "How do you know?" "Because you won't let her die." Jax looked down at the puppy. Her eyes were still closed, but her mouth moved slightly, as if she were dreaming. He thought about Grady, about the weight of his body as Jax carried him through the mountains, about the moment his heart stopped, and he thought about this tiny creature, fighting to stay alive. "I couldn't save him," Jax said quietly. Maya did not ask who he meant. She just nodded. "But you can save her," she said, "and maybe that's enough." By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside was silent and white, the trees heavy with snow, the sky pale and clear. Jax stood on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, and watched the sun rise over the ridge. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, but he stayed there, feeling it, letting it ground him. Inside, Maya was packing up her supplies. The puppies were all alive, all warm, all nestled against their mother. The smallest one, the one they had fought for all night, was sleeping soundly, her tiny body rising and falling in steady rhythm. "She's going to make it," Maya said, stepping outside to join him. "They all are." Jax nodded. He did not trust himself to speak. Maya studied him for a moment, then said, "You know, you don't have to do this alone." "Do what?" "Live, heal, whatever it is you're doing up here." Jax looked at her. "I don't know how to do it any other way." "Then learn." She walked to her truck, then paused and looked back. "I'll check on them again tomorrow, but they're in good hands." Jax watched her drive away, the tires crunching through the fresh snow. When the sound of the engine faded, he went back inside. The mother dog was awake, her eyes following him as he moved through the room. He knelt beside her, and for the first time, he reached out and touched her head. Her fur was still rough, still tangled, but beneath it, he could feel the steady beat of her heart. "You're one hell of a fighter," he said softly. She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing. And for the first time in 2 years, Jax Miller smiled. What would you do if a life depended on you holding on just a little longer and the storm wasn't letting up? Over the next few days, Jax fell into a rhythm he had not known in years. He woke with the sun, the pale light filtering through the cabin windows and painting the wooden walls in shades of gold and amber. The first thing he did every morning was check on the puppies. They were growing stronger by the hour, their tiny bodies filling out, their voices growing louder. They squirmed and wiggled in their nest, searching for warmth and milk, their movements clumsy but determined. The mother dog, whom Jax had started calling Mama in his head, though he had not said it out loud yet, was a fierce protector. She never left their side for long. When Jax approached, she would watch him carefully, her body tense, ready to spring into action if needed, but she was learning to trust him. She let him handle the puppies, clean their bedding, and even hold them while she ate. Jax fed her 3 times a day scrambled eggs, canned meat, rice mixed with chicken broth, anything he had that would help her regain her strength. She ate with the desperation of someone who had been starving for too long. Her ribs were still visible, but they were slowly disappearing beneath new muscle and fat. Maya came by every day, bringing supplies, puppy formula, soft blankets, medical equipment, bags of dog food. She taught Jax how to bottle feed the smallest puppy, how to check for signs of illness, how to keep the space clean and warm. She showed him how to gently massage the puppies' bellies to help them digest, how to stimulate them to go to the bathroom, how to monitor their weight. Jax learned quickly. He had always been good at following instructions, at mastering new skills. But this was different. This was not about survival or combat or completing a mission. This was about care, about tenderness, about being present. It was harder than any mission he had ever been on, because it required him to feel. On the 4th day, Jax's nearest neighbor, Martha Jenkins, showed up with a basket of food. Martha was in her late 60s, a widow who lived a mile down the road in a yellow farmhouse with a wraparound porch. She had silver hair that she wore in a braid, sharp blue eyes that saw everything, and a voice that could cut through a blizzard. She had been bringing Jax food since the day he moved in apple pies, casseroles, jars of homemade jam, despite the fact that he never invited her in and rarely said more than 2 words. But today, when she knocked, Jax opened the door wide. "Heard you've got company," Martha said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Her eyes went straight to the pile of blankets, the puppies, and the German shepherd lying protectively beside them. "Well, I'll be damned," she breathed. "Maya told me, but I had to see it for myself." She set down her basket and knelt beside Mama, who sniffed her hand and allowed a cautious pat. Martha's hands were wrinkled and strong, the hands of someone who had worked the land for decades. "She's a beauty," Martha said, "and these little ones, Lord have mercy, they're precious." Jax closed the door. She showed up in the storm. "I know. Maya told me the whole story." Martha stood and looked at him, her expression softening. "You saved them, Jax." "I didn't do much." "You opened the door. That's more than most would do." She handed him the basket. Inside were fresh bread, homemade stew, and a pie that smelled like cinnamon and apples. "You're going to need your strength," she said. "Raising 9 puppies is no small thing." "I'm not raising them," Jax said quickly. "Once they're weaned, I'll find them homes." Martha smiled, a knowing, gentle smile that made Jax feel like she could see right through him. "We'll see," she said. She stayed for an hour, helping him clean, playing with the puppies, talking about nothing and everything. She told him about her son, Luke, who had died in the Marines 6 years ago. He had been 24 years old, full of life and dreams, and he had been killed by an IED during a patrol in Iraq. She had not seen his body. The coffin had been closed. "I used to think the worst part was not getting to say goodbye," Martha said, her voice quiet. "But then I realized the worst part was forgetting how to live after he was gone." Jax did not know what to say. He had spent 2 years trying to forget how to live. "I spent the first year angry," Martha continued. "Angry at God, at the Marines, at Luke for leaving me. I spent the second year numb. I stopped going to church, stopped seeing friends, stopped caring about anything. And then one day, a stray cat showed up on my porch. She was pregnant and starving, just like this one." She gestured to Mama. "I let her in. I fed her. I helped her have her kittens. And I realized something." "What?" Jax asked. "That sometimes the only way to survive grief is to find something worth loving again." Martha stood and gathered her coat. She looked at Jax, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Some guests don't come by accident, Jax. They come because we need them as much as they need us." She left before he could respond. Jax stood in the doorway and watched her walk to her truck. She turned back once and waved. He waved back. When she was gone, he closed the door and leaned against it, his heart heavy with something he could not name. He looked at Mama and the puppies, and he thought about what Martha had said. Does grief have to be the end of the story, or can it become the beginning of something we didn't know we needed? Drop your thoughts below. 2 weeks passed. The puppies' eyes opened. Jax was there when it happened, sitting on the floor, watching them stumble and tumble over each other in their clumsy, joyful way. One by one, their eyes cracked open, revealing soft blue gazes that would darken to brown in the weeks to come. They blinked in the light, confused and curious, their tiny heads turning to take in the world around them. And the smallest one, the fighter, the one Jax had held through that first terrible night, looked right at him and wagged her tail. Something inside Jax broke open. He picked her up, cradled her in his hands, and felt the weight of 2 years of silence lift just a little. She was so small, so fragile, but she was alive. She was here, and she was looking at him like he was the most important thing in the world. "Hey there, little fighter," he whispered. She licked his thumb. Jax felt his throat tighten. He had not cried in 2 years. Not at Grady's funeral. Not when he left the teams. Not when he packed up his life and moved to the mountains. But sitting there on the floor of his cabin, holding a puppy no bigger than his hand, he felt the tears come. He did not try to stop them. Maya came by that afternoon and found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by puppies. She laughed, a sound he had not heard from her before, warm and genuine. "You're in trouble now," she said. "What do you mean?" "They've got you. Once they've got you, it's over." Jax looked down at the puppy in his lap. "I'm not keeping them." "I didn't say you were. I just said they've got you." She sat beside him, and together they watched the puppies play. They stumbled over each other, their legs too long and uncoordinated. They nipped at each other's ears, squeaked when they fell, and immediately got back up to try again. Mama lay nearby, her eyes half closed, content. "You ever think about getting back out there?" Maya asked after a while. "I could use help at the clinic, especially with rescues." Jax stiffened. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not," Maya said gently. "I'm just saying, if you ever want to do something that matters, the door's open." She did not push. She just left the offer hanging in the air, quiet and patient. That night, after she left, Jax sat by the fire and thought about what she had said. He thought about Grady, about the mountains, about the dog who had trusted him when she had no reason to. And he realized something. He was tired of hiding. But just as he was beginning to believe he could step back into the light, the weather had other plans. The second storm came without warning. It was late December, and the cabin had become something close to a home. The puppies were 4 weeks old now, their eyes bright, their legs strong. They tumbled and played, nipping at each other, chasing Mama around the room. Jax had built a small outdoor pen on the porch, a sheltered space where they could get fresh air without wandering into danger. But on the night of December 20th, the sky turned black, and the wind began to howl. Jax was outside, checking the pen, when he felt a shift in the air, a pressure that made his skin prickle. He looked up and saw the clouds rolling in, fast and low, the kind of clouds that meant trouble. "Damn," he muttered. He hurried back inside and checked the weather on his emergency radio. The forecast was grim. Another blizzard, worse than the first. High winds, heavy snow, sub-zero temperatures. Wind chills reaching 40 below. It would hit in less than 2 hours. Jax moved fast. He brought in extra wood, stacking it near the stove until he had enough to last 3 days. He filled every container he had with water pots, buckets, jars. He checked the propane levels in his lamp and stove. He sealed the windows with towels, stuffing them into the cracks to keep the cold out. He carried the outdoor pen inside and reinforced the space around the puppies with extra blankets. Mama watched him, her ears pricked, sensing his urgency. She stood and paced, her body tense. "It's okay," Jax said. "We're going to be fine." But he was not sure he believed it. The storm hit hard. The wind slammed into the cabin like a battering ram, shaking the walls, rattling the roof. Snow fell so thick it was impossible to see more than a few feet. The temperature plummeted. Jax kept the fire roaring, but even so the cold crept in through every crack, every seam. Frost formed on the inside of the windows. And then, just after midnight, he heard it. A crack, loud and sharp. Jax grabbed his flashlight and ran to the window. Through the swirling snow, he could barely make out the porch. Part of the railing had torn away, and the wood was splintering under the force of the wind. If he had left the puppies out there, they would have been crushed. His heart pounded. He turned and looked at Mama, who was lying protectively over her puppies, her body a shield against the cold. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew to bring them to me?" She did not respond. She just kept her body between her babies and the storm. Jax sat down on the floor beside them, his back against the wall, and let out a long breath. For hours he stayed there, listening to the wind scream, watching the fire burn, feeling the warmth of 9 tiny lives pressed together in the safety of his home. And he realized something profound. This was not about the dog. This was about him. She had not come to him for shelter. She had come to remind him that he was still capable of protecting something, that he was still capable of caring, that he had not lost himself completely in the mountains. The storm raged all night and into the next day. Jax did not leave the cabin. He kept the fire going, fed Mama and the puppies, and made sure everyone stayed warm. The wind howled like a living thing, battering the walls, trying to get in. But the cabin held. And so did Jax. On the second night, the wind finally died. The snow stopped. The world outside was buried under 3 feet of fresh powder. Jax opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit him like a punch, but he stood there, breathing it in. The sky was clear, the stars were out, and the silence was absolute. He looked up at the stars and thought about Grady, about the night he died, about the guilt Jax had carried for 2 years. And for the first time, he let himself say the words out loud. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the cold air, then disappeared into the night. Jax stood there for a long time, his breath forming clouds in the darkness, and when he finally went back inside, he felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. Have you ever fought for something so small the world couldn't see it, but you knew it mattered more than anything? Tell us your story. By the time the second storm passed, Jax had made a decision. He was going to name her. The smallest puppy, the fighter, the one who had almost died in his hands, deserved a name. They all did. But hers mattered most. He sat on the floor, watching her play with her siblings. She was still the smallest, but she was fearless. She climbed over the others, nipped at their ears, and barked in a high-pitched squeak that made Jack smile every time. "You need a name," he said. She looked at him, her head tilted, her ears flopping to one side. Jax thought about the night she arrived, about the storm, about the moment he had held her against his chest and felt her heartbeat flutter like a fragile bird. He thought about what Martha had said, that sometimes the only way to survive grief is to find something worth loving again. And he thought about what Maya had said, that the dog had not just needed shelter, she had needed him. "Hope," Jack said. The puppy wagged her tail. "Your name is Hope." From that moment on, she was Hope. And the mother dog who had walked through the storm 9 times, who had trusted him when she had no one else, he named her Mama, because that was who she was. A mother who would do anything to protect her children. Over the next few weeks, Jax threw himself into caring for them. He woke early every morning, fed them, cleaned up after them, played with them. He took them outside when the weather allowed, letting them explore the snow, their tiny paws sinking into the white powder. They barked and tumbled and chased each other, their joy infectious. Maya continued to visit, and slowly Jax began to open up to her. He told her about Grady, about the mission, about the guilt. She listened without judgment, without offering platitudes or easy answers. She just listened. "You can't save everyone," she said one afternoon, "but you can save the ones in front of you." Jax looked at Hope, who was curled up in his lap, fast asleep. "I'm trying," he said. "I know." Martha came by often, bringing food and supplies. She helped him build a larger pen outside, one that was sturdy enough to withstand the wind. She taught him how to make homemade dog treats, how to train puppies, how to be patient. "They're going to test you," she said, "but that's how you know they trust you." And they did test him. They chewed on his boots, knocked over his coffee, woke him up in the middle of the night with their barking. But Jax did not mind, because for the first time in 2 years his cabin felt alive. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned orange and pink, Jack sat on the porch with Mama at his feet and Hope in his lap. The other puppies were inside, tumbling over each other, their squeaks and barks filling the cabin. "You saved me," Jack said to Mama. "You know that?" She looked up at him, her dark eyes steady. "I don't know how you found me. I don't know why you chose me, but I'm glad you did." He scratched behind her ears, and she leaned into his hand, her eyes closing. Jax looked out at the mountains, at the trees heavy with snow, at the smoke rising from his chimney, and he realized something. He was not hiding anymore. He was living. When the person you couldn't save becomes the reason you fight harder for the ones you still can share this, if you've ever found redemption in the smallest, most unexpected place. Spring came slowly to Vermont. The snow melted in long, lazy streams down the mountainside, carving channels through the earth. The ice broke apart on the river with loud cracks that echoed through the valley. The trees began to bud, their branches dotted with green. The air smelled of earth and rain and new beginnings. By April, the cabin was surrounded by wildflowers, and the sound of birdsong filled the mornings. The puppies were 3 months old. They were healthy, strong, and full of life. Jax had spent the winter teaching them how to walk on a leash, how to sit, how to come when called, how to stay. He had not intended to train them. But once he started, he could not stop. It reminded him of the work he used to do, the discipline, the focus, the bond between handler and dog. And he was good at it. The puppies responded to him in ways they did not respond to anyone else. They watched him closely, learned quickly, and obeyed without hesitation. Even Hope, the smallest and most stubborn, would sit perfectly still when Jax gave the command. Maya helped him find homes for 8 of the puppies. Good homes families who understood the responsibility, who had space and time and love to give. Each adoption broke Jax's heart a little, but he knew it was the right thing. He kept detailed records of each family, made them sign agreements, and promised to check in regularly, He wanted to make sure the puppies were safe, loved, cared for. But Hope, he could not let her go. She had been his from the moment he held her against his chest and felt her heartbeat flutter. She was his fighter, his reminder, his second chance. "You're staying with me," he told her one morning. She wagged her tail and licked his face. Mama stayed too. She had been his from the moment she walked through his door, and he had been hers. They were a unit now, a pack, a family. One morning in late April, Jax drove into town with Hope and Mama in the back of his truck. He pulled up in front of Maya's clinic and got out. She was standing on the porch, arms crossed, smiling. "So," she said, "you finally ready?" Jax nodded. "I'm ready." "Good, because I've got 3 rescues that need you." For the next year, Jax worked at the clinic. He helped rehabilitate abused dogs, trained rescue animals, and accompanied Maya on calls to remote farms and mountain cabins. He was good at it, better than good. The dogs responded to him in ways they did not respond to anyone else. They trusted him, they obeyed him, they loved him. He started a training program for rescued dogs, teaching them basic commands and socialization skills before they were adopted. He worked with veterans who were struggling with PTSD, pairing them with trained service dogs. He found a purpose he had not known he was looking for. Martha still brought him pies. Maya still showed up unannounced. And every evening, Jack sat on his porch with Hope at his feet and Mama by his side, watching the sun set over the mountains. He thought about Grady often, but the guilt had softened. It would never leave, not completely, but it no longer controlled him. Because he had learned something in that cabin, in the storm, in the presence of a mother dog who refused to give up. He had learned that sometimes the people and the animals who need us most are the ones who save us. One evening, as the fireflies began to rise from the grass and the stars appeared one by one in the violet sky, Martha came by with a fresh apple pie. She sat beside him on the porch steps, and they watched the night come in together. "You look different," she said after a while. "How so?" "Lighter. Like you're not carrying the whole world anymore." Jack smiled. "I had help." He looked down at Hope, who was curled up beside him, her head resting on his boot. Mama lay nearby, her eyes watchful, her presence steady. "You know," Martha said, "Luke used to tell me that the hardest part of being a Marine wasn't the war. It was coming home and figuring out what to do with all that strength when there was no battle left to fight." Jax nodded. He understood. "But then he told me something else," Martha continued. "He said the real battle is deciding to live again, to love again, to let people in. Even when you're scared they'll leave." She stood and patted his shoulder. "You're winning that battle, Jax, and I'm proud of you." She left the pie on the step and walked back to her truck. Jack sat there long after she was gone, listening to the crickets sing and the wind move through the trees. He thought about the night the storm came, the night the dog appeared, the night he opened the door. And he thought about the man he used to be, the one who hid in the mountains, who carried his grief like a stone, who believed he did not deserve peace. That man was still there, somewhere, but he was no longer alone. 2 years after that first storm, Jack stood in front of the cabin and looked at what it had become. The porch had been rebuilt, stronger than before. New railings lined the steps. Flower boxes hung from the windows, filled with wildflowers that Martha had planted. A larger dog pen sat in the yard, and inside it, 3 rescue dogs were playing dogs. Jax was training before they were adopted. Hope was 4 years old now, fully grown, a beautiful German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a heart full of loyalty. She was Jax's constant companion, his shadow, his partner. She went with him everywhere, to the clinic, to training sessions, on hikes through the mountains. Mama was older now, her muzzle flecked with gray, her movements slower. But she was still strong, still watchful, still the matriarch of the little family Jax had built. Jax had changed too. His hair was longer, his eyes were softer. He smiled more, he talked more, he let people in. He was still a former Navy SEAL. He still carried the memories of war, the weight of Grady's death, the scars of his past. But he had learned to carry them differently, not as punishment, but as part of his story. Maya had become one of his closest friends. They worked together at the clinic, rescued animals together, trained dogs together. She understood him in ways few people did, and he was grateful for her. Martha still brought him pies. She still checked on him. She still reminded him that some guests are sent to teach us how to love again. And Jax had learned. He had learned to love Hope, to love Mama, to love the work he did, to love the mountains that had once been his prison but were now his home. One evening in late summer, Jax sat on the porch with Hope and Mama, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple. The air was warm and smelled of pine and wild flowers. He thought about the night the storm came. He thought about the mother dog who had walked through the blizzard 9 times, carrying her puppies to safety. He thought about the smallest puppy who had almost died in his hands. And he thought about the man he had been, the one who wanted to be left alone, who believed he had nothing left to give. That man was gone. In his place was someone new. Someone who had learned that opening the door was not a weakness, but a strength. That letting people in was not a risk, but a gift. That love was not something to fear, but something to fight for. Jax reached down and scratched Hope behind the ears. She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing. "You saved me," he whispered. "You and your mama, you saved me." Hope opened her eyes and looked at him, her gaze steady and full of love. And Jax knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes that faith still lives in ordinary days. Leave a comment about the blessings you've witnessed in your own life, and subscribe for more stories that remind us we are never too lost to be found again. May God bless you, keep you warm in your winters, and fill your home with the quiet, steady light of hope.